Good morning. Welcome to Bible study. For today is Wednesday, July 28th. We've been working our way through the books of the Old Testament, and we have been in Joshua. And we find ourselves in Joshua 22, and we left off last week at the end of verse 9. After the eastern tribes are able to return home, they go to build an altar. But while they were still in Canaan, and when they came to a place called Gilead, near the Jordan River, the men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh stopped to build a large and imposing altar. The rest of Israel heard that the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had built an altar at Gilead, at the edge of the land of Canaan, on the west side of the Jordan River. So the whole community of Israel gathered at Shiloh and prepared to go to war against them. So notice what happens. We have the tribes who have just helped each other settle in the land, who have just fought battles, are now ready to go to war against one another. So I want to lay the framework of our worship wars in church as nothing new. How often we might see ourselves in competition with other churches or with other Christians or with other gatherings. And I want to say that this is something that is a long-standing temptation of believers in God, but it's not of God. And so let's find out what happens. Verse 12, so the whole community of Israel gathered at Shiloh and prepared to go to war against them. First, however, they sent a delegation led by Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, to talk with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. I wonder how often we jump to war, we jump to offense, we jump to battle when our pride is wounded or when we feel threatened. You can imagine why the Israelites might feel threatened by this altar. These tribes may feel like their unity is being threatened, or that these other tribes are worshiping a false god at a false place. And there's a heavy cost here. And so what happens is they pause and they send a group to talk, to find out what is going on and why, and what were the motivations. So one from each of the 10 tribes and each of the head of his family within the clan of Israel. When they arrived in the land of Gilead, they said to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, the whole community of the Lord demands to know why you are betraying the God of Israel. How could you turn away from the Lord and build an altar for yourselves in rebellion against him? Was our sin at Peor not enough? To this day, we are not fully cleansed of it, even after the plague that struck the entire community of the Lord. And yet, you are turning away from following the Lord. If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with all of us tomorrow. There's this communal understanding that the sins of some affect the whole community of God. And they're not wrong to be afraid because, again, they're reflecting on Peor. This was the first sin of sacrifice to worship Baal, and it happened back in Numbers. And they were struck down by a great plague that afflicted the whole nation. So let's hear what happens. Verse 19. If you need the altar because the land you possess is defiled, then join us in the Lord's land, where the tabernacle of the Lord is situated, and share our land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar other than the one true altar of the Lord our God. Sounds familiar to me. How many Christians do we hear saying, well, they're Catholic? Or, oh, they're Seventh-day Adventist. Or, oh, they're that other kind of Christianity. That's not real. They don't have real faith. Didn't the divine anger, verse 20, fall on the entire community of Israel when Achan, a member of the clan of Zerah, sinned by stealing the things set apart for the Lord? He was not the only one who died because of his sin. Verse 21, then the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh answered the heads of the clans of Israel, the Lord, the mighty one, is God. The Lord, the mighty one, is God. He knows the truth, and may Israel know it too. We have not built the altar in treacherous rebellion against the Lord. If we have done so, do not spare our lives this day. If we have built an altar for ourselves to turn away from the Lord, or to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings, may the Lord himself punish us. They appeal to the true God and they say, who are you to judge our motives? That's not what we're doing. Who are you? And don't you think our God is big enough to punish us if that's really true? Are you so jealous for your God that you think you need to avenge him? I wonder how many of our bad decisions and how many of our struggles and conflicts are caused by this feeling that we need to go on the offense for God. This feeling like we need to protect ourselves from God's wrath by punishing others. I think that's where a lot of conflict in the church comes from. I think that's where a lot of conflict in families that kick out their children because of being gay come from. And I think that it is not of God. It's fear. And so when we are rooted in fear and inability to trust God, we think we have to go on the offense for God. And that's what the Israelites try here. They try and go on the offense for God because they're so afraid of what God might do to them if they don't protect their sacred tabernacle. They feel that their church is the only true church, and this altar that these other tribes have set up is not. And so their response, verse 24, the truth is, we have built this altar because we fear in the future that your descendants will say to ours, what right do you have to worship the Lord, the God of Israel? Aha! So we're in chapter 22, verse 24, and we're hearing that just after all of these battles to claim the land, they're already afraid of one another. They're afraid of the power that they've seen in the battle, and they're afraid for their future that they won't be able to remain unified. And so they begin doing things that eat away at their unity out of fear. Verse 25, the Lord has placed the Jordan River as a barrier between our people and your people of Reuben and Gad. You have no claim to the Lord. This is what they're afraid would happen. So your descendants may prevent our descendants from worshiping the Lord. So we decided to build an altar, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a memorial. It will remind our descendants and your descendants that we too have the right to worship the Lord as a sanctuary with our burnt offerings and our peace offerings. Then your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no claim to the Lord. This is a very powerful foreshadowing of what is to come. One day, the Israelites will fall away, they will fight with one another, and in coming back from their exile, they will restrict the right worship of God to different sects of Israelites. By the time we get to Jesus's day, we have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and we have Israelites who think that they've got the right way and seek to bar others from coming to the temple. And we see this as Christ breaks open those barriers and invites Gentiles in, because there is no artificial boundary or barrier that God cannot cross and bring people in to his temple. The building and the barrier itself, the veil is torn by Jesus' death. And so that is a little prefiguring here that God doesn't intend for there to be barriers, but we put them up. Verse 30. When Phinehas and the priest and the leaders of the community, the heads of the clans of Israel, heard this from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they were satisfied. Imagine how life could be if we approached one another before we went to war, before we went on the offense, and we spoke truthfully about our fears and our motivations, and we sought the Lord in it. I hope that we can model that in our lives and in our families and in our church. And maybe one day the world will catch on. So they were satisfied. Verse 31, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, replied to them, "Today we know the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against the Lord as we thought. Instead, you have rescued Israel from being destroyed by the hand of the Lord." So the people who came to strike vengeance for God, they have their hearts rent, and they see that, yes, we can understand your fear. We can understand what division may come, because they'd been divided before. And so now this altar becomes the symbol of unity and hope. Verse 32, Then Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, and the other leaders left the tribes of Reuben and Gad and Gilead, and returned to the land of Canaan to tell the Israelites what had happened. And all the Israelites were satisfied and praised God, and spoke no more of war against Reuben and Gad. The people of Reuben and Gad named the altar Witness, for they said, "It is a witness between us and them that the Lord is our God too." There's a tradition in many churches inviting people to give witness, inviting people to give a testimony of how God has been alive in their life. It's not practiced very much in Roman Catholic or in Episcopal settings, but there's so much power in seeing God at work in the lives of others to help reflect and see how God is at work in us and how we are never as divided as we appear. Chapter 23, Joshua's final words to Israel. The years passed, and the Lord had given the people of Israel rest from all their enemies. Now remember, these are literary customs. They're saying they've given rest from all their enemies, but remember, we also know that there were several tribes that failed to drive out certain portions, certain tribes, and end up settling in other portions of their land. So this rest from all their enemies doesn't mean they've accomplished everything. It just means they're not beleaguered, they're not embattled, and they're not constantly at war to defend what they have. And Joshua is now very old, and he called together all the elders, leaders, judges, and officers of Israel, and he said to them, "I am now a very old man. You've seen everything the Lord your God has done for you during my lifetime. The Lord your God has fought for you against your enemies. I have allotted to you as your homeland all the land of the nations yet unconquered, as well as the land of those we have already conquered, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. This land will be yours, for the Lord your God will himself drive out all the people living there now. You will take possession of their land, just as the Lord your God promised you." Every good leader in their farewell address invites people to reflect on the good that has occurred to this point and the hope of where they're going. And that's what Joshua does. He says, look, we've conquered much. There's more to do. but God will do the work. But that doesn't mean we get to sit around and wait on the Lord to do it for us. God has called them to do it with him. And this is the next little reminder that Joshua gives, verse 6. So be very careful to follow everything Moses wrote in the book of instruction. Do not deviate from it, turning either to the right or to the left. Make sure you do not associate with the other people still remaining in the land. Do not even mention the names of their gods, much less swear by them and serve them and worship them. Rather, cling tightly to the Lord your God as you have done until now. For the Lord has driven out great and powerful nations for you, and no one has yet been able to defeat you. Each one of you will put to flight 1,000 of the enemy, for the Lord your God fights for you, just as he has promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. Rooted in love. Loving God is the source of this strength that will allow one to drive out 1,000. So Joshua knows they need to do it. They still have work to do, but the work begins in love and trust in God. And here comes the warning, verse 12. But if you turn away from him and cling to the customs of the survivors of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry them, then know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive them out of your land. Instead, they will be a snare and a trap to you, a whip for your backs, and thorny brambles in your eyes, and you will vanish from this good land the Lord your God has given to you. The Lord wants us to open our eyes and be aware of the snares and traps that certain people and certain places represent in our lives. If you are a gambling addict, don't set foot in a casino. Just because they remain in the land doesn't mean you can go there. Don't set foot in a casino. Don't download Slotomania on your phone. And stay away from anything and everyone who would draw you into sin. It's no different for the Israelites back then than it is for us. Just because there are people doesn't mean they're good people. And just because they have gods doesn't mean they're good for you. Cling to your God. Verse 14, soon I will die, going the way of everything on earth. Deep in your hearts, know that every promise of the land the Lord your God has come true. Not a single one has failed. But as surely as the Lord your God has given you the good things he promised, he will also bring disaster on you if you disobey him. He will completely destroy you from this good land he has given you. If you break the covenant of the Lord your God by worshiping and serving other gods, his anger will burn against you, and you will quickly vanish from the good land he has given you. And after they have these dire warnings of what is to come, and what unfortunately is going to happen, they renew the covenant. Then Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, including their elders, leaders, judges, and officers. So they came and presented themselves to God. Joshua said to the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods. But I took your ancestor Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him into the land of Canaan. I gave him many descendants through his son Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave the mountains of Seir, while Jacob and his children went down into Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I brought terrible plagues on Egypt. And afterward I brought you out as a free people. But when your ancestors arrived at the Red Sea, the Egyptians chased after you with chariots and charioteers. When your ancestors cried out to the Lord, I put darkness between you and the Egyptians. I brought the sea crashing down on the Egyptians, drowning them. With your very own eyes you saw what I did. Then you lived in the wilderness for many years. Finally, I brought you into the land of the Amorites on the east side of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I destroyed them before you. I gave you victory over them, and you took possession of their land. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, started a war against Israel. He summoned Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to him. Instead, I made Balaam bless you, and so I rescued you from Balak. When you crossed the Jordan River and came to the Jericho, the men of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. But I gave you victory over them, and I sent terror ahead of you to drive out the 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not your swords or bows that brought you the victory. I gave you land you had not worked on. I gave you towns you did not build, the towns where you are now living. I gave you vineyards and olive groves for food, though you did not plant them. So fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Choosing today whom you will serve is a powerful thing to do. There's a reason why the Episcopalian Church and the church handed down to us has advised beginning the day in prayer with morning prayer and ending the day in prayer. Because beginning the day choosing the God we will serve and follow is powerful. And so you don't have to have a formal, hour-long quiet time with God that includes the Bible and prayer. Maybe your life allows for that, and maybe it doesn't. But making a special intention to choose to serve God today in the morning before you do anything else, and finding some time in prayer and the Word of God in Scripture, it's going to change your life and unfold many blessings that you can't even fathom. Joshua goes on to say, would you prefer the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or will it be the gods, the Amorites, in whose land you live now? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. I have a plaque in my house that says, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. I hope it's true. I hope that we serve God in what we do. But I know that even the most faithful of people can drift away over time. The thing that fights that drift is remaining grounded in the faith handed down to us in daily connection with the God we serve. So the people reply in verse 16, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord our God is the one who rescued us and our ancestors from the slavery in Egypt. He performed mighty miracles before our very eyes. As we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies, he preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations living here in the land. So we too will serve the Lord, for he alone is our God. Then Joshua warned the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy and jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you abandon the Lord and serve other gods, he will turn against you and destroy you, even though he has been so good to you. Joshua describes the reality that there is righteousness and vengeance with our God. There is much grace, much mercy, and much forgiveness. But there's also a demand to follow. And he says, don't choose this if you can't come and go through with it. And the people answered Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. You are a witness to your own decision, Joshua said. You have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, they replied, we are witnesses to what we have said. All right then, Joshua said, destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God. We will obey him alone. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day at Shechem, committing them to follow the decrees and regulations of the Lord. Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions as a reminder of their agreement. He took a huge stone and rolled it beneath the terebinth tree beside the tabernacle of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, this stone has heard everything the Lord said to us. It will be a witness to testify against you if you go back on your word to God. It's interesting how in the later aftermath of the medieval church, a movement came to destroy icons, to destroy stained glass, to destroy statues, to destroy all of these things because some felt they had become idols instead of directing people to God. But we find, and part of why the Episcopal Church keeps imagery and keeps statuary and has things that remind us of what God has done and who God's faithful have been, this reminder of the promise is biblical. Here we have the Israelites setting up a great stone monument to remember the promises that they made before God. So when we set up a cross, or when we have a saint's picture, or anything that others might say, well, that's an icon, or not an icon, that's an idol, that's not the real God. We as Christians have the freedom to say, no, this is something that points me towards God's faithfulness and God's promises. And that's what this stone is for the Israelites, the reminder of their promises. Verse 28, then Joshua sent all the people away to their own homelands. The people of Reuben and Gad, page stuck together. Verse 29, after this, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the land he had been allocated at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. The people of Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, those who had personally experienced all that the Lord had done for Israel. So, personal experience is directly tied to our ability to act faithfully. We cannot give people a living faith simply by sharing intellectual truths about God or about the Bible. It is only the remembrance of what God has done in the living memory of the people of God that kept them faithful. And for a generation, that's transmitted. Joshua shared with the elders, and those elders continued to share with the people of the land. Everyone who personally experienced it stayed faithful. But we know that as the faithful generation dies off, if there is not a transmission of personal encounter with God, the faith dies off too. It's no scandal or secret that the church is never more than one generation away from death. It always has been. It always will be. But there is always God at work and alive and able to witness afresh and anew to people who've never even heard of God. And that is the hope, that even though certain institutions, certain families and clans may fall away, God is eternal. God does not cease to exist even if we cease to worship him. And God can raise up children of Israel from the stones. And so we have a promise and a hope even greater than Joshua did. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought along with them when they left in Egypt, were buried at Shechem, in the plot of land Jacob had bought for the sons of Hamor for 100 pieces of silver. This land was located in the territory allotted to the descendants of Joseph. Eleazar, son of Aaron, also died. He was buried in the hill country of Ephraim in the town of Gibeah, which had been given to his son Phinehas. And thus ends our journey through Joshua. He was a faithful leader. He faithfully followed in the footsteps of Moses, and he brought the people to their next phase in faith. And he invited them and encouraged them to continue to the next phase beyond which his leadership could take them. That is what it means to be faithful leaders in Christ. That is what it means to be faithful leaders of our household. Keeping the faith for ourselves and inviting people to go beyond what we have even accomplished. So we're going to pick up with Judges next week. We're going to end a little early today because I don't like to start a new book right after I finished one. So we're going to rest after the end of Joshua, and we will pick up in Judges next week. So I'm going to stop the recording. Ding.